Welcome to The Next Level, delivered by FedEx. I'm Dan Thomas, joined in the studio today by Craig Burley and Ali Moreno. If that wasn't enough, Gab Marcotti also joins us as we recap what we saw in the Champions League quarterfinals. In particular, a couple of players who really impressed us. Milan, of course, saw Rafael Leao steal the show. A wonderful assist for him in that key goal against Napoli in the second leg. Meanwhile, Lautaro Martinez, a goal and an assist for him in two players that will be key if either Milan side want to make it through to the final this year. Gab, overall, who impressed you more, Rafael Leao or Lautaro Martinez?
I'm going to go with Leao simply because obviously that tie was a lot more tense and a lot more uncertain. Inter up 2-0 from the first leg against Benfica. The thing about Rafael Leao is he's a typical player who, can go for long stretches where you don't see him. Perhaps he's not as involved off the ball as you'd like him to be, and then he just turns it on and does something game-changing. And I think Lautaro is a much steadier player and perhaps maybe even slightly more team-oriented player as well.
Of course, as a result of both Italian teams facing off in the semi-final, we've seen them. We've got form this season. They've met 3 times already domestically, Gab. Who would have the advantage if we just solely focus on those games?
Well, if you just look at those games, Inter won 2 of the 3. Milan's victory coming early in the season in September, I think it was 3-2 in the derby. But it matters what the form is like now. And what we've seen in recent weeks is 2 teams that are fighting to finish in the top 4, who could be even further back, could be out of the top 4 if Juventus get their points back, the points that they were docked by the tribunal. So, these are 2 teams, they can't afford to sit back and say, oh, well, we'll just focus on the Champions League. No. First and foremost, you got to get back into the Champions League next year. And right now, based on form, Inter have had trouble scoring goals, although they're creating chances. Milan a bit tougher to read of late, also because they actually did rest a lot of people between the first and second leg of the Champions League.
But what we saw from Milan and what was so impressive, Gab, is they managed to stifle that impressive Napoli attack.
They did. I think what you have there is, you saw a very good defensive performance from Fikayo Tomori, who, has really had his ups and downs this season. You have, for my money, one of the best goalkeepers in the world, and magic Mike Maignan between the sticks. And you have that midfield with Bennacer and Tonali and Krunic as well, that works so hard and is so good at cueing the counterattack. And it's a slightly more defensive Milan perhaps than they would like it to be, and more so than it was last year. But in these games, in these in or out 100-minute home and away formats, that's what can get you over the line, especially against a more talented opponent, as probably was the case against Napoli.
Who's going to be in the final, Ali?
It's a tough one. It really is. And Gab just mentioned form. And when you go in form, I think you find that Milan has something about them and those magic moments, not only from Maignan in goal, but the magical moments of Rafael Leao in transition. And I think that's the way they'll play against Inter Milan, just absorbing pressure, going on the counter, and trying to find something that Leao is special. Having said all that, I'm going to take Inter.
Oh.
I'm going to think...
Because you were talking nonsense?
Well, mostly. But Lautaro Martinez and I think Inter is a more consistent team than what we have seen from AC Milan. So I'm going to take the consistency of Inter Milan over 2 legs.
I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go from Milan.
Right.
I just think they look so dangerous on the counter-attack against Napoli in both legs. Albeit Napoli have somewhat slipped in terms of their standards. Not taking anything away from Milan. All right, I did a little bit there. But it was still a tough nut to crack, which they did. Gab mentioned Tomori. I thought the Danish international Simon Kjær next to him, just every time he looked up and they threw something in the box, Napoli that was, that he was there as the most experienced defender to be in the right position and to head it away. And again, the pace of Rafael Leao up front. I mean, he is so quick. Gab mentioned his consistency. If he can find that in the right moments, I don't think there's a defender out there that's quick enough to stop him. It's whether he has that consistency and confidence to go and get the job done. I thought, watching him against Tottenham in the previous round, I was not impressed. Watching him against Napoli, I actually was. I thought they played well in both games, and I fancy them to be the victors out of both Milan sides.
Gab, who have you got?
I think it's a toss-up, but since you're going to press me, I'm going to lean Inter for the simple reason that I think Inter actually said they've had trouble scoring, but they don't have trouble creating chances. Certainly against Italian clubs, they've been doing it for a while. I don't want to go down the XG route, but they're way underperforming their XG. And if you create chances, it's going to go in at some point. I think in guys like Barella and Brozovic, I think they have midfielders who can come in, who can score. And I think Lukaku is going to find his scoring touch again. And Lautaro as well. Let's not forget this goal. I think was his first in 9 games as well. That's got to come back, and that could be enough. But I mean, it's really a coin flip as I see it.
Inter and Milan, of course, know each other extremely well, as do Manchester City and Real Madrid these days as they meet once again in the semi-finals of the Champions League. We could analyse so many different parts of these teams when comparing and contrasting, but let's focus on the midfield. Obviously, 2 of the best in the game going at it at each other. Who would you say has the advantage when you compare Rodri, Gundogan and De Bruyne against Modric, Kroos and Valverde?
I'm going to say, and this hurts a little, but I'm going to say Rodri, Gundogan and De Bruyne. And at this point in their careers, I think they're in a better place than Modric, Kroos and Valverde. And let me tell you, I love me some Fede Valverde. I just don't quite think that Real Madrid has settled as to who the next Casemiro was going to be. It was supposed to be Tchouaméni, that hasn't worked. Camavinga's now playing left back. Valverde is not quite that guy. You have that role settled with Manchester City and Rodri, and he's been outstanding for them in protecting that back line, in giving this team balance, and then he provides a platform for Gundogan and De Bruyne to have the freedom to join in the attack and to be players that really dictate the pace of the game for Manchester City. I'm going to take the midfield of Manchester City, and that's not something I say lightly because the strength of Real Madrid for many years has been that midfield. It's not quite what it was before.
Well, unless something's changed, it's Manchester City.
Yeah.
Because Manchester City dominated both games in the Champions League semi-final last year, albeit they lost. But to dominate for almost 180 minutes, you have to dominate the middle of the park. So I don't see how that's changed. Kroos and Modric are a year older, haven't had bad seasons, but haven't been brilliant domestically. And City have been strong in there, so I expect City to dominate the game. Not to necessarily means they're going to win it, because that's what happened last year. But I think that is one of the strong points of their team, and that allows other people like Bernardo Silva, Jack Grealish, Erling Haaland to flourish. So I think City will dominate, but they have 1 or 2 issues to figure out in other positions.
Should be a cracking couple of ties in both Manchester and Madrid. Gab, how do you see it going? What's your prediction for this one? And don't say it's a toss of a coin again.
I won't. I'm going to lean Real Madrid here. I'm going to lean Real Madrid essentially for 2 reasons. One is I think we've seen that a goalkeeper who can stand on his head can be all the difference. And I think Real Madrid have one in Thibaut Courtois, especially compared to Ederson, who I think has been slightly below his level this season. The other factor I would flag a little bit for City is that while the scoreline suggests that they dominated Bayern over the 2 legs, if you watch the games, Pep Guardiola said it himself, this wasn't exactly the case. So we're seeing a slightly different City. And the third reason that I point to is fixture congestion. City aren't going to get a break between now and the end of the season. They're playing all the time. They're playing continuously, and they're playing high stakes games, obviously, in the Premier League. Real Madrid season is over. Other than the Copa del Rey final, which is down the road. So, it's easy to point to Kroos and Modric and say that they're older and whatnot, but I do think that, if you manage their workload on the day in those 2 legs, I think they can bring some of the energy of old And so overall, I'm going to slightly lean Real Madrid.
Are you leaning that way?
I'm leaning a bit left, but I think the second legs in both these...
You're back.
Yeah, God. I think the second legs in both these games for these clubs were a little bit skewed because of the results in the first leg. I think Real Madrid at Chelsea were a bit betwixt and between and allowed a very average and a poor Chelsea side this season, much more possession than they would normally have against a good side. And I think we saw in the Bayern Munich game in the Allianz Arena that City at 3-0 up were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. So I think we will see. I pick up Gab's points, fixture congestion, big squad though. If they don't pick up any injuries, I think they can handle it. And I'm just leaning because I think at some point City, I think, will go over this line and have to learn from their mistakes. And the bigger mistakes that they made last season, they have to have learned from that against this side. I'm going Man City.
This is as good an opportunity as I think Manchester City is ever going to have. This is a vulnerable Real Madrid team. And as good as they are in the competition, you watch Real Madrid play over the course of a long season in La Liga, and their vulnerability is everywhere. It's a team that depends heavily on what they do in transition, and that's an area that I think Manchester City has improved upon. And the biggest area that they've improved upon is having a guy who can put the ball in the back of the net consistently, having that immediate threat. Not just a bunch of guys that play underneath, but a guy in Erling Haaland who's inside the 18-yard box. That will be a challenge for Real Madrid as well. I think this is a year for Manchester City. This is a clear opportunity. I think Manchester City are able to advance.
Gab Marcotti, Craig Burley and Ali Moreno, thank you very much. That's the next level delivered by FedEx. Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.